Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our complimentary webinar, The New Wave of Digital Learning. My name is David Wentworth. I'm the Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and I'm joined today by Vinod Chaudhary, who is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Litmus by Calidus Cloud. I want to thank Litmus for sponsoring today's webinar, and I'm going to let Vinod tell you a little bit about Litmus and what they do.
That's great. Thank you, David. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, The New Wave of Digital Learning. I'm going to take a moment to quickly talk about Litmus, and then David is going to walk you through how to navigate your way from exploring digital to doing digital, and then ultimately becoming digital and being digital in the learning space. By the end of this session, you should have a good understanding of what it means when you hear digital learning, why digital learning, and how it can benefit your learning organization. But first, I'm going to just take a quick moment to talk about Litmus. So Litmus is a 100% cloud-based solution that unifies learning management, the extended enterprise, and pre-packaged content in an innovative platform. So what this means is that we've got all the three components of a great learning management system. We provide you training for running your training as a profit business, to train your customers, partners, ISVs, franchises. And we also have around 1,500 courses in our course marketplace that we actually curate, aggregate, and create for our customers on varieties of subjects like sales, marketing, leadership, healthcare, and all that. Today, we have over 5 million users in more than 130 countries and 24 languages using our solution. We are a Salesforce Elite partner and also Salesforce App Exchange certified, which means that you can access Litmus from within Salesforce as much as and do anything that you want with Litmus from within Salesforce without leaving the system, as much as what you can do from within the Litmus itself. And being App Exchange certified means that all the updates and upgrades that Salesforce does to its ecosystem does not affect Litmus in any adverse way. We have the perfect combination of powerful search and ease of use that learners love, and on average, our customers go live in 6 weeks, many in days, as opposed to 6 to 12 months with other players. They will just stay on this slide. We moved a little bit quicker. So we are the fastest, the hottest growing learning platform for the corporate market. So today, in short 5 years, Litmus has grown from 10,000 users to over 5 million users across the globe. 40% of the Fortune 1000 companies rely on us to power their training. Our customers have completed over 30 million courses on our platform, and we are on place with 1 billion API calls per year. So we are very connected, we are open, we are transparent. We have 50 plus prepackaged connectors out of the box, and have been rated as #1 in customer satisfaction by independent review platforms. David, please move the slide. But our commitment and dedication towards creating a next generation learning experience is not without its proof points. Customers and analysts clearly love us. We are in the top of all the major analyst rankings, and we are in the top of all independent review platforms for B2B solutions. We are in the top 3 of Brandon Hall's Excellence in Technology Awards also. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to David, who is going to actually talk to you about this new wave of digital learning, and teach you a little bit about what it really means to be digital in the learning space. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Vinod. And just real quick, for those of you who aren't maybe familiar with Brandon Hall Group, most of you probably are, but we are a ACM Research and advisory firm, and we have a lot of different types of tools and research available to organizations to meet their needs and to improve performance. And we cover the entire HCM spectrum, from learning development, obviously, which is my practice, but we also cover talent management, leadership development, talent acquisition, and workforce management as well. We also have many open surveys as part of our research. If you'd like to take some of our surveys, there's opportunities to get gift cards for taking the survey, and people who take our surveys also get access to some of our research and get downloads of some of our reports as well. So you can check it out on our website, www.brandonhall.com, and look for open surveys, and you can look at some of those and help us out there. Just before we get started, one last thing to let everybody know that the session is being recorded, so a recording of the webinar will be made available to attendees in the next day or so after the webinar is completed. The slides are available in the handout section of your control panel. If you look over there, you can download them there. A link to them will also go out in that email as well. And then also you'll see the questions tab in your control panel. Please use that as liberally as you like. We'd like to have questions. If something comes up in the webinar you have a question about, put your question there. Both Vinod and I will keep an eye on those and see if we can answer your questions as we go. Other questions we will save to the end. We'll leave a little bit of time so we can answer those. And if you have any commentary or anything else you want to add, feel free to do that in the question box as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. So as Vinod said, we're talking about this wave of digital learning. Things are changing, and they're changing pretty dramatically. I mean, I think we've been talking about this change, for a few years now anyway, but very, very recently, it's picked up in momentum and scale. And so we're seeing organizations move from the old way of doing things to a much different way of operating, where things are no longer hierarchical and they're not really based on this sort of top-down org structure. Things are much more of what they would call like a hierarchy, with the connections moving in every direction. People are connected, breaking through silos. A lot of things are being generated from the bottom up as opposed to coming from the top. A lot more organic innovation, and it's a combination of things. It's a demographic shift. It's new technologies. It's changes in the market that are happening that are driving a lot of this, but it's creating this new environment in which businesses operate. And this new environment moves really, really quickly, especially compared to the way things used to be. And it's all about being agile and being able to move fast. And so the challenge then is that has a profound impact on learning. Learning has been designed for decades now to be at the service of the old business model. Here are our goals, here's what we need to achieve, let's craft some large-scale learning programs that help us get there. And what we're finding is that as the business shifts in this new environment, learning's having a hard time keeping up as the priorities change, and as we all know, they can change pretty rapidly, sometimes more than once in a year. And typically, learning isn't able to make that kind of an adjustment. So we're seeing a new way of thinking about learning. We have to be able to make learning a bit more agile. We have to focus on that learning experience, and we have to deliver it in multiple ways. And a lot of this has to do with this idea of what is being labeled digital learning, meaning taking all these different types of learning experiences and creating them and making them available to people and allowing learning to be more flexible, to be more adaptive, and meet people where they are. So as this shift happens, we're seeing that in our research. We're seeing that organizations are starting to focus on new and different things. So we asked companies what their learning technology priorities were for the coming year. What's the most important things to you as far as learning technology goes? And the number one thing is data analytics. And this is a shift over the previous year where data analytics was third behind social collaborative tools and mobile delivery. And so what that's saying is now that as organizations are becoming more adventurous and starting to implement a lot of these things like social collaborative learning, mobile delivery, they're getting back into a focus on data analytics. How do we measure? How do we track all of this stuff? What does it mean for the learning function overall? With all of these new types of learning. So there's a heavy focus now on the analytics of all this type of learning. But you can see some of the other things that appear on this priority list. I mean, 31% of companies say that figuring out how to implement games and simulations is a priority for them. Even some of these at the bottom, 15% are still trying to figure out, MOOCs are important to me. These are massive open online courses, typically created and delivered by academic institutions where anybody can go in and take a class. We're seeing organizations trying to adopt that sort of a mentality in their learning, and things like augmented reality even. I mean, 11% of companies make that a priority. How do we apply this to our learning? And just quickly, augmented reality is that ability to overlay data information over a real world view. So as if you're looking through, say, the camera on your phone, or maybe through a device like an Oculus, like a headset device. So there's a lot of activity going on and a lot of exploration around learning technologies. The flip side to just the technology is also the modality, right? So how is it that people are experiencing their learning? And as always, the number one way, and this is important to remember as we talk about this wave of digital learning, the number one way that companies are delivering learning today is still in-person instructor-led classroom training. We ask companies, how much of your learning is delivered via these methods, and if you look at it on a 5-point scale, it scores a 3.4, and the next thing would be that informal learning piece, which is 2.59. So for as long as we've been measuring this, in-person instructor-led classroom has been the #1 way that companies deliver learning, and that probably will remain true for a long time. The stuff that Vinod and I are talking about today, and the idea around this digital learning, isn't saying that there will be no more classroom, there will be no more courses. That's not true. It simply means there will be a new way of thinking about how do we use these things, how do we best leverage them, and how do we make the most of them. So trying to incorporate new technologies and new modalities into a learning system that includes formal, informal, and experiential learning and all of these things together. Because when you look at it, we ask companies, how effective do you think these things are? And again, based on a 5-point scale, you can see that the lines are much closer than they are for the usage, where there's such a big gap for in-person instructor-led classroom training, but how effective companies do feel that informal learning is. Very high on the list. Online performance support, also very effective. So there's clearly drivers here that companies find these types of learning modalities and technologies to be effective. It's just a question of what does it mean, how do we put it together? And we're going to get a little bit into that here. So I think to tie it all together, one of the things we asked companies was, how often do people need to actually connect with learning in order to be good at their jobs, right? In order to be effective, people need to connect with learning, and how frequently is that? And we found that 61% of companies say that has to be weekly or daily or even more often. And so right there kind of gets at the heart of the matter. If we need people to be able to connect to learning on a frequent basis in order to be good at what they do, we can't rely on the old blended model, where the old blended learning was simply courses and online e-learning courses and classes. It's got to be more than that, because we can't expect people to take an in-person class once a week. We can't expect people to click through a course once a day. There have to be some sort of learning experiences, things that we can deliver that can reach these people on a much more frequent basis. And so how do we do that? And the fact of the matter is, when you're not delivering courses and classes, when those things aren't occurring, people are learning anyway. They're learning on their own. And we need to figure out, how do we tap into that? How do we take advantage of it and deliver the learning experiences that they need to be good at their job? And so, one of the things that we just want to talk about is, what do we mean by digital learning? And, these are the characteristics that, based on, my research and talking to different companies, these are the characteristics that I find this is what we mean by digital learning. It's the type of learning that can be contextual. It can meet the learner and be personalized in a way that it's relevant to the learner, whether it's based on their role or their location in the organization, their particular development path. But as the learner is experiencing the content, they get why they're experiencing it. They understand what it means to them in their role and in their role in the company. Digital learning also is a move towards smaller, right? Making things short, quick updates, things that we can just drop in really quickly to either reinforce something that they've already learned or introduce a new concept. But the idea is to be unobtrusive, to meet people at their moment of need, and just drop it in there. In order to do that, we have to start thinking smaller and shorter. We have to be thinking informal, right? And for most organizations, informal is a pretty broad term. It covers anything that isn't in the classroom or in a SCORM course, right? And everything else is informal. There's a lot of different subtleties and different tiers to what is informal, but the reality is the idea is to make the learning every day and sort of ad hoc, not scheduled. It's just learning that can occur when and where the learner needs it, without the need for scheduling, without the need for heavy system reliance on materials, but having a system that allows you to deliver those types of learning experiences in an ad hoc, everyday way. And also the mobile piece, right? So that expands that whole moment of need piece of it. You can meet people where they are on their phones or tablets as they carry them around. So it creates a whole other aspect of how do we reach people where they need to learn. And then there's also the social elements, where we bring in the other learners and they learn from one another, whether through discussions or Q&A or recommendations on content. Hey, you should check this out. It really worked for me. Here's a challenge that I had. Maybe you should, this is how I solved it. Maybe you could try this too. And Vinod, I wanted to bring you in and just get a little perspective from where you are around what you're seeing from organizations that you work with when they start to think about digital learning? What are some of the things that you hear? What are some of the things that you talk about when you talk about digital learning?
Yes, David. I mean, you hit the you hit the nail rightly on that one. Why? Because what we are seeing is that work and learning are converging, which leads to a broader definition of learning org. So what this is doing is making lots of traditional learning things less impactful than before, and leaving the fate of L&D in the new learning org potentially less tenuous. Uh, so at learning organizations, what they have to do is they have to actually become a fabric of the working culture itself, with all the millennials coming in and all that. So increased focus on designing a holistic learning experience is very important. As we see most of the agile learning organizations that we deal with build their L&D into employees' daily work, creating tools, systems, processes, all driven by the learners' needs and all that. And they take advantage of all of these, social tools and these analytics and mobile tools and all that. On front of mobile, we see mobile options are now becoming ubiquitous, giving
Right.
workers the ability to access information at the point of need, and also enabling new types of learning tools like artificial intelligence, virtual and augmented reality, wearables, location-based learning, and all that. And yet, out of 700 plus vendors, we being one of them, only seven offer a truly mobile learning experience, right? So, you know, we are finding that more and more what is becoming important is curation and context is becoming very important in the learning organization. And
Mm,
more organizations are gravitating towards the learning modality where learning becomes a part and parcel of their workers' daily needs. And yeah,
mhm.
it's not just relegated to a specific course or activity that you are taking, but it becomes a continuous, always on kind of learning that you are constantly doing.
Right. I mean, if you think about one of the biggest challenges the learning function has faced traditionally is that learning is always looked at as something separate from the job. People come in to their jobs, they come into work, they do their job, and then they have learning scheduled, and in their minds, it is, okay, I now need to stop doing my job and go do this learning. And then when I'm done with that, I can come back and do my job. And it's created this sort of split where all of the learning experiences feel very separate and almost foreign to the actual flow of work. And what digital learning is allowing companies to do is just what you're describing, Vinod, is allows them companies to sort of break things down, make them more contextual, fit them into the flow of work so they make sense to the learner, they make sense to where they are in their career, where they are in the organization, and now learning these things feels like part of the job. In order for me to do my job well, I need this, this, and this. And in order for me to progress down this path, I need these other things. And so it becomes, yeah, much more part of work and not some sort of separate event. And so some of the other things that it means to different parts of the organization, what does it mean for the learner? So on the learner side, digital learning means ease of access. I can get this stuff when I need it. It isn't that I've been told that I need to take this class, so now I have to go log into this system and I have to find it and I have to, enroll and get scheduled. The idea of that when it's time for a piece of knowledge to be transferred, it's easy to do. I can do it when I need to. I can have a seamless experience where maybe I do part of it on my computer at my desk and then I don't finish, but I can finish later on my tablet, pick up where I left off. So it just makes it much easier for the learner, less obtrusive. It fits a more natural learning pattern, the way people automatically already learn things. So let's think about it this way. In everyday life, when you're walking around, you realize there is something that you don't know. Okay, there's an answer to a question that I don't know. What do? We immediately search, we Google it, we now have the answer, at least we hope we have the answer to the best of Google's ability to provide it. But that period of time where we're not knowing something has shrunk down to almost nothing. And so this is how people learn in their everyday life. So the idea is that we need to be able to deliver that within the context of our overall learning strategy, right? Rather than letting people go out and just randomly look for things. When they're looking for answers, they're getting the answers that they need to do their jobs through the learning strategy, through the systems that we have in place, through the technology that we're using. It's more personal for the learners. Again, I talked about this a little bit before. You know, the idea that it feels relevant. Digital learning really allows you to do that, to get down to that level where things feel much more specific to individual learners. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to get down to, you know, literally the individual person, but the fact that the learning is directed to them based on who they are and what they do, it just makes a lot more sense to them. And again, both Vinod and I have talked about the moment of need, how important that is, where, you know, in order for me to move forward, I need to know this. And now these systems, these technologies allow us to do just that. Here it is. Like, think for a moment, someone on a shop floor in a manufacturing plant, and there's a new machine there, and they come to the machine to do the task at hand, but they realize, you know what, I don't recall this last bit about how specifically to use this machine. They can take out their smartphone, scan a barcode on the machine, and it gives them a list of how-tos, all the steps that they need to take, and they can play one of those videos to refresh their memory, as opposed to, well, I don't know how to use this, I got to go back into the class and get waitlisted, and maybe 3 months from now I can come back to this machine and know how to use it. From the organizational side of things, being able to deliver this type of content means you're spending less time creating those big formalized learning experiences. Now again, they're not going away, but if we're able to deliver a lot more information in these other ways, we don't have to spend as much time creating these big bulky courses, these big classes, which can be kind of a grind and they get kind of transactional. And it's, you know, there actually is not a lot of reuse in those, whereas these different types of digital modalities, things can be reused in a lot of different ways. And so by not focusing so much on that, the learning organization can focus a little bit more on strategy, like how do we make the business better? What are the things that we can do to improve performance? You know, let's sit down together with the leaders of the business and find out what it is learning needs to do to help them achieve their goals. And what we've seen, and I'll show this in a second, is that for learning organizations that are doing this, they feel like they have a stronger link between what they do and the business, and a stronger link between what they do and the employees, right? So getting back to that idea that learning feels separate from the business, by delivering this type of learning, the learning function creates this link of, no, what we do is directly linked to our business and how well we perform, and it's also directly linked to the experience that an employee has working here, that they're being developed, that they're growing in their role, and that we're, you know, delivering an experience where they can learn and be developed. So it's a lot of important impacts when you start to, you know, shift your thinking like this. And I'm going to grab a question that just came in. I want to actually, let me just pull it out and expand it a little bit. So with digitization, here's the question that we just got. With digitization, more and more learning is being consumed at the point of need. Is learning becoming more experiential because of this? And should we expect the 70-20-10 model to shift to a higher percentage of on-the-job learning? And so this is what I'll say about that. And we do touch a little bit on 70-20-10. And I know that, Vinod, you did, I think, provide an answer, but I wanted, you know, this for everyone to hear the question and answer. So 70-20-10, that research is probably about 20 years old, and really what it isn't a math formula. It isn't simply, this is the prescription for your learning, how you have to create your learning. It's just sort of representation of how people naturally learn, right? The majority of the stuff that people acquire as knowledge comes through their everyday experience, trial and error, observation, you know, that sort of thing. That's where it's the experiential learning. What's happening is these new technologies and the shift in technology and the availability of all of these things are allowing organizations to deliver an experience that is more like that. Now, it's not to say that, you know, companies are going to start delivering only 10% of their learning as formal. I don't see that happening. But what we're able to do is to tap more into that 70 and into that 20 and deliver those types of experiences. And so I do see those numbers increasing as far as the amount of learning that's going to be happening in those modalities, because companies are now able to create, you know, if you think about it, an experiential learning is stuff that sort of happens, right? It's an experience. But there are now technologies in place that allow us to create those experiences, deliver them, track them, and measure them. So you can create, you know, you can manage like a stretch assignment. You can create a virtual experience for learning and track how the learners do in that and gather data from there. So that's what we're seeing is we are seeing that shift, but I don't think anytime soon we're going to get to a point where companies are actually delivering through their systems 10% formal, 20% informal, and 70% experiential. So I had mentioned earlier about the personalization and the contextualization, and I just wanted to make sure that touch on this to show how important this is. The ability to get down to this level, if you're able to not spend all the time thinking in terms of big courses and classes, these overarching content pieces, it allows you to get more personalized. And we ask companies, do you do this, right? And here's the description, the definition here that we used of personalized learning. Delivering a learning experience that's based on either their personal and or professional needs. And so it's one thing about the experience itself, right? Is that catered to where I am in the organization or my development path or what have you? And also, am I able to access it how and when makes the most sense for me? So there's sort of two sides to that. You put them together, and that's what really creates this personalized learning experiences. And so we asked the companies, do you do this? And among the companies that do it, we found that high performers are far more likely to do just this than low performers. And when I say high performers, these are organizations in our research that we sort of separate out to try to find out if they're doing anything differently than the other companies. And these are companies that have their KPIs year over year are all moving in a positive direction. Things like revenue, profitability, market share, customer satisfaction. So we take those companies and we sort of pull them aside and say, is there a correlation between being a high performer and doing any of these things that we're asking about in the study differently? And we found that 62% of high performers say, we do this. We use personalized learning. And only 35% of low performers say the same thing. Now, this is a correlation. It's not causation. This doesn't say that because these companies do this, they're high performers. It just means that high performers are nearly twice as likely to use personalized learning to reach their learners as low performers. And what does that mean? Well, here are some of the results from that. So when we ask companies that do this, we found that 93% of them agreed that this type of learning supports an employee reaching their professional goals. 91% say it supports the employee's needs in that continuously developing knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? What Vinod was talking about, the continuousness of learning. 88% said it's helped them improve the overall organization's strategies, mission, and vision. And then, as we were referring to earlier with the 70-20-10, delivering this type of learning aligns with that framework. Those companies that try to deliver using that framework to inform their strategy. Again, not saying that they're delivering 70% experiential learning, but that they're using that concept to inform their learning strategy. Personalized, 81% said in order to do that, personalized learning aligns very well with being able to deliver those types of experiences. And so that was just a little bit on the personalization of it all. And so the idea is, okay, we've got all these things out there, all these different types of learning, all these different modalities, all these different technologies. How does it all work together? And I think it's very important to remember then that it all works together, right? It isn't one instead of the other, and it isn't even really a sequential rollout of you got to do the class, then you got to do the collaboration, and then you have to do the experiential learning. They're all working together all in time, and we have to think about it like this, that you start with that anchor, the class, the course, that thing that exists, but then use informal learning to build on that. After those events have occurred, come back with a quiz, come back with a video update, come back with an activity that sort of tests whether or not the people remember what it was that went on in that class. Maybe a game that uses the core elements of that class as part of the gamification process. But the idea is that there's learning going on a macro level, right, which is those courses of classes, and you think of it like maybe even as like a movie where that's the overarching, the arc of the story, right? And then within that arc are these mini arcs of we're coming back and reinforcing and retouching and landing on these things. And Vinod, you've got some thoughts around this too, because I know we've talked a little bit about the whole idea of macro and micro when it comes to learning. You want to share maybe your insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've got some thoughts around that. In fact, I want to go back to the personalized learning and say that
Sure.
when have we not done personalized learning, right? I mean, ever since the internet has come, the personalized learning has come to fore, right? I mean, we go out, read blogs, we go out, read wikis, we go out, search information in the internet and find articles of interest to us that actually propels us forward, right? So personalized learning always has been there, but now where the push for the technology is, where the push for the learning technologies is that, okay, yeah, instead of you going and trying to find out all of these various sources of information that are not validated, that may not be really true to what you want to learn, and bringing some credible sources to you, right? Making you aware of your subject matter experts in your organization and all that. But going back to your point, to the question that you asked, the macro and micro, right? I mean, we don't see that, and our organization also doing that. That we don't see the macro going away, right? We are in a continuous, like 8 weeks product rollout cycles. We continuously roll out innovative products and services. We continuously update our products and all that. So how are we going to teach the new employees who are coming and joining our company? It is at the macro level. So there's this timeline where when you join the company, you go through a macro learning process, you become productive, you become efficient, you start contributing, and then you take yourself to the next level slowly by doing these micro learnings, learning from your peers, learning from your subject matter experts, going into your LMS system and learning the nuggets, and doing bite-sized micro learnings, like something like Litmus Boost and all that. And then again comes a period where the product lifecycle has changed and you have introduced a new product or technology, and then you again go to that macro. So we see these ups and downs with macro, micro that actually makes an efficient employee base for your company and moves the business needles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, precisely. And then, so if we put all this together, and I had mentioned earlier about talking about what it means for the organization, the learning organization, and how the learning organization feels as though they're more connected to the business and more connected to employees. Our research actually bears that out. We asked organizations who are doing this, who are using that sort of 70-20-10 framework to inform their learning strategy. We asked them, okay, what have been some of the benefits? Have you improved the link between learning and individual performance? Have you improved the link between learning and organizational performance? And you can see 95% say, at least to some degree, they improved that individual link, and 91% say they've at least to some degree improved that organizational link. So anything that we can do to get learning more closely linked to performance, whether it's individual or organizational, are the things that we need to do, because that, at the end of the day, is the ultimate goal of learning, right? The outcome of learning is not learning. The outcome of learning is performance. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations still look at the outcome of learning as learning, meaning they're really only measuring themselves by how much learning did we deliver, how many people did we get through it, how many people completed it, did people pass, can we check the boxes, and did they like it? And it doesn't really go much further than that, and there's zero connection to performance for either the individual or the organization when we look at it that way. So trying to think about outcomes and performance and delivering this digitized learning environment, being able to come to learners with all these different experiences and meeting them where they need. And again, it isn't even about giving everybody everything, right? It's about creating a mix that matches the audience, that matches content, the subject matter itself, matches the time frame within which there needs to be either a performance or a behavior change. And so these things will shift all the time, and the digital learning strategy allows you to make those shifts and be adaptable in that sense. And so let's take just a look at how you put that together. And here at Brandon Hall Group, based on all the things that I was just saying, and on our research and the discussions we've had with different organizations, we've put together a what we call the learning and performance convergence model. How do we get learning and performance to converge? And there's a lot going on here, but if you look at it, in each section, this is how it works. The idea is to start with a business performance outcome. What is it that the business needs to do to improve performance? What's the metric that says, as a business, we are doing better? And what is it, what is that outcome that learning can help us achieve? And so whether it's revenue growth, profit increase, launching a new product, improving customer satisfaction, there can be anything. It's obviously going to be different for different organizations, but these are just some examples of what is the ultimate outcome that we're after. Okay, so looking at that, like say revenue growth, what are the learner performance outcomes? What is it that an employee's performance can do that will have an impact on that? What is it that an employee will do behavior-wise that will impact revenue growth or profit increase? So what are those things? And let's identify what those are. And once those are identified, what's a learning objective that helps an employee be able to do that? What is an outcome of learning? What can we expect to see happen when we deliver this learning experience that's going to create that learner performance, that employee performance outcome, which will then affect the business? And then once we've decided what those objectives are, we figure out, okay, how do we achieve those learning objectives? And here's where it gets to be much more art than science, right? This is what I was saying earlier, that it isn't as simple as, well, it's 70-20-10. It has to be 70% experiential, 20% informal, 10% formal. It doesn't work like that. The idea is creating this blend, this experience that pulls from either, it could be everything, it could be a mix of all three, it could be just two. In some cases, it could be just one. It could literally be, the answer might be, no, this has to be this one formal learning experience for this particular outcome. There's nothing that says that is wrong. If that's what the approach and it's going to get the results, then that's the approach. But this is what I mean by it being more of an art, because it's sort of a trial and error. We have to figure out how we think this is going to work. Based on our previous experiences, what has gotten us the best results in these different circumstances? Let's put together a program, and maybe it's a 20-50-30, maybe it's 30-40-30. Which types of experiences are we going to include? What do we need in this? Rolling it out and then seeing how well it works. At the end of it, once it's rolled out, are we meeting those outcomes completely? Are we meeting them partially? Are we not meeting them at all? What do we need to revisit? But by looking at it like this and breaking it down into these different areas, when things aren't achieving the outcomes that you want, it's much easier to go back and make smaller changes, incremental fixes along the way, rather than trying to have to go back to the very beginning, scrap the entire program and start over because something didn't work. It could be one small piece of this that was misaligned that can be fixed to eventually achieve those outcomes. So the idea is that, again, it's a blend of these things. It could be any blend that actually works, and it's not about doing it sequentially. It isn't, formal, then informal, then experiential. These things are happening in conjunction. There could be some informal collaboration that occurs before a class so that the learners who are involved in that class get to know one another, can exchange ideas and thoughts, do some pre-work before the actual formal event. Even during the formal event, there can be collaboration while the course is being taken or the class is being attended. There can be that. There can be experiential stuff within a class, an in-person classroom. You can have people work out scenarios together. That can be, that's considered to be an experiential learning. So all these things can work together, then they roll out in that way. And then once the formal is completed, as Vinod was saying, you can use all these different informal and experiential learning tools to revisit, to reconnect with the learner, to make sure that the material is still fresh and still is retained and works, and that the outcomes are still being achieved. So just to sort of wrap it up into some of the key takeaways is that, again, formal learning is not going away. All this talk about digital learning, informal learning, isn't saying that this new wave is replacing the old wave. In fact, if you go back through the history of learning and how we started as an apprentice model, right? It would be one person learning from another in person. Here's how you do this. And then we managed to figure out, well, if we get a bunch of people together, one person can teach a whole group of people something. And so we get sort of that class thing. And then as time goes on, it changes even more with the advent of the internet. So now, not only can I reach this group of people here in front of me, I can reach this vast dispersed group. And then we sort of hit Web 2.0, where the web became a two-way street. It wasn't just about consuming content. Right now I can interact. So that's a whole new level of learning. Learning that goes in multiple directions. But in each step of the way, we never really got rid of the thing before it. We still have that one-on-one learning still occurs. Maybe it's a mentorship. Maybe it's literally an apprenticeship. We still have classes. We still have, asynchronous and synchronous dispersed learning through the internet. We use the back and forth. So as each thing comes, it finds its place within the learning ecosystem. So formal learning is not going away. It's about how do we make the most of the learning that's available to us. How do we deliver in ways that make sense for our learners in addition to the classes? And it affects how we create and deliver courses and classes. We need to think about those differently. What's the classroom experience like? That can change based on digitization and the different types of uh, um, learning that we have. So informal learning should be symbiotic. It should work with the formal learning, be related to it, and that goes back to making it make sense for the learner. It's very important to think of when you're thinking of informal learning to not simply think of it as some separate thing from the formal learning, right? They work together, one informs the other. Learning needs to meet the learners where they are, and whether that's via mobile or whether it's a time issue, whether synchronous, asynchronous, off hours, different time, whatever works for the particular audience. Learning needs to be flexible enough to meet the learners where they are. Once companies get to a point where they've wrapped their heads around digital learning and are able to deliver this type of thing, it means much less time wrestling with the big content, the big courses, the big classes. They're not going to go away, but they're going to be easier to manage, and they're going to make more sense because you're following up with all of this other different type of learning. And so the whole idea is that it just allows for a much broader mix of experiences. We all like to think of our organizations as this one unit, but the fact of the matter is it's made up of a bunch of different people who, while they may be all on board with the corporate culture, they're still individuals. And one size doesn't always fit all, and that just goes with learning styles. It goes with there are generational implications. Having these tools at your disposal means that you can create learning experiences to meet almost any environment and any need that you have. We do have a question that came in, and Vinod, actually, I think I'm going to let you take a crack at this. Can you share some examples of how organizations are using social media to support their digital learning? And I've got some thoughts on it, but I know that you've probably worked with some clients that have done this sort of thing.
Yeah. So the way the organizations are using the social media, and actually the standards are still being defined, because a lot of
Right.
LMS technologies or LMS companies think that they have social, but and then they are doing great in social and all that, but it's not really truly the case, right? So social actually means that using a variety of means available to you to be able to impact the digital learning, right? So
Mm-hmm.
basically, being able to read the blogs, wikis, being able to reach out to subject matter experts in your social circle, being able to reach out to other people in your social circle and ask them some tidbits of nuggets, being able to upload your content, like how we allow most of quite a lot of our companies who have been with Litmus to upload their video content uh, into their courses and all that. So like Pivotal, SPCA, 1-800 called Junk, PepsiCo, we allow all of them. They Zumba is one great company that uses a lot of our discussion forums and learner upload technologies, and the Litmus Boost and Litmus Persist technologies that actually allows them to reinforce by sending nuggets of information via phone, via text, and also via small questions in the email format, and also send branded emails, which is the Litmus Persist, to actually tell them to go ahead and take go and execute on those nuggets of information and all that. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a variety of combination of things that you can do, and there is not one size fits all
Right.
for the social media, right? And because some people do, some companies do better in social media than the other companies. Now, what we also do is we integrate seamlessly with Slack to actually allow you to create channels and all that you can access through our LMS technology. And ServiceNow is using one such channel to actually access their learning needs through our channel, the Slack channels and all that. So it's a multiple factors that actually makes it a cohesive social experience.
Mm-hmm. Right, and some of the things that I've seen organizations do very similar to what you're talking about, but the idea that it isn't, and it's interesting that you use the term social media, because I think that in a lot of at least business leaders' minds, they default to thinking about things like Twitter and Facebook, which in the first forays into social learning, I think a lot of companies and technology providers sort of went that route. They thought, okay, we're going to create profiles and news feeds and all this, and I think that sort of it fell out of favor. And what we're really getting at is the social aspect just means connecting the learners with one another. And so the idea that the way that these companies are using social to support digital learning is, prior to this, people would email each other a question. And if it was a one-on-one thing where I ask you this question and then you answer it, that experience comes and goes and is never relived again. Or if you ask, if you include multiple people on the thread, maybe not everybody reads it. Maybe, email threads get messy. So what now you've got is that people can ask questions about content, about what they're learning, and say, listen, I have this question. I'm stuck on this. This is bugging me. And somebody can respond to that. Now, doing it on a social platform means that everyone gets to benefit from that. Other people who may have had that question but not been able to ask it or not thought to ask it now get to see someone ask it and get to see the answer. And so those become learning experiences in and of themselves. And I mean, think about yourself when you ever attend something in person. Have you ever been to a conference and you've sat in a session and you listened and maybe there's some questions back and forth in the session, but then you go into the hallway and you ask a colleague or somebody that you know about the session, and then they give you some feedback, and suddenly you've got this other perspective, even more information that you never would have gotten in the session itself because you're getting somebody else's perspective. Without these tools, that's not happening in your learning environment either, right? People experience the course or the class, and they may have thoughts about it. They may have questions about it. They may want to discuss it with their colleagues. Unless you've got a platform to do that, how is that going to happen? Maybe they're going to run into each other in the hallway, and again, that experience occurs, but you didn't facilitate it. You didn't manage it. You didn't track it. You can't measure it. But if they have this platform available to them, these questions can be asked. They can get answered. You can track and measure what people are asking questions about, who's answering the questions. You suddenly have insight into who your knowledge hubs are in the organization. And then it gets beyond that into the whole social aspect of things like recommendations and commentary and voting. Like, listen, this video is really helped. It gets right to the point. I love this. It really saved the day. And you start to find out what content really works, far beyond what a smile sheet could have ever told you about a class. You're getting real insight into, what, this video or this class is great, except this part bothered me, right? You might not get that insight from a smile sheet. You get a specific point where something might be misfiring. So there's just a lot going on in the social aspect. It's really just about allowing the learners to connect to each other in some way, whether it is like a threaded discussion, or I think Vinod mentioned the expert exchange. We've seen a lot of success with that. If you're able to go into a place and say, man, I wish I could find somebody who really knew how to do pivot tables in Excel. Well, if you're capturing that information as part of an employee profile, somebody can go into this place and actually find that expert and connect them right then and there in the platform, and have that experience. And so it's just really about the social is about, it isn't about sharing photos of cats and telling everybody what you did last night. The social aspect is connecting with each other, sharing your insights, sharing your information, and creating this, not only expanding the learning that's at the core, whatever that core course or class is, but creating new learning experiences that they get from one another. And then they can share material with one another. Hey, I have this article that I read that really gets to the point of this, and it really makes a lot of sense. It might not be part of the curriculum, but this learner can share it, and other people can benefit from it. So that's really what I've seen, and we've had a lot of great case studies in our library around companies that are using that type of learning very successfully. We've got some time left. We made sure we left some time for more questions. I don't see any at the moment, but if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to share those in the question box, or if you have any other commentary that you'd like to share. But Vinod, did you have anything that you wanted to share as sort of a takeaway for folks?
Yeah, so I mean, on the social learning front, I wanted to just highlight two more points. One is the time to productivity, and where the social learning rubber meets the road is time to productivity, as you had mentioned, David, and I wanted to highlight that. Why? Because so it's truly an in the moment learning, right? When you have a nagging need to get your question answered or to learn something, you do not have to wait in the L&D queue for a course to be created for that question to be answered, right? You can
Right.
reach out to your network of people and get that question answered, and in fact learn something more in return by virtue of those people answering back to you, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is that it's the advancement of your knowledge base also. So you might be thinking about a product or service and the modus operandi of using that product or service in one way, but when you reach out to other people, you might learn different ways that you have not fathomed that they are using the same product and service and might be useful and worthwhile to you. But
Hmm.
going back to wrapping up the sessions, I mean, I started off with telling that, okay, yeah, what does it really mean to explore digital, to doing digital, becoming digital, and being digital, right? I mean,
Hmm.
so I mean, in our mind, becoming digital is almost like L&D becomes invisible as ownership of learning moves to the business, right? So it's not just one L&D department's functionality. As I was telling, that learning org's job would become more tenuous in this new world. And the reason why I'm telling that is that you do not really have to carve out a niche for an L&D department to go and take over the ownership of all of the learning needs of an organization. L&D has to, the true learning orgs have L&Ds embedded into the individual departments themselves to, to proactively, measure and provide learning at the point of need. So in that respect, the L&D almost becomes invisible because it becomes more of a facilitator than somebody who is controlling all of the learning needs of an organization. Uh,
Hmm.
so being digital in our mind, it actually means that L&D has fundamentally changed the system, empowering the entire organization to unlearn old processes and relearn via continuous use of data. This is sort of what we have been talking about, right? So constantly being in the moment, constantly providing data and input and insights into what new nuggets of learning can be done, right?
Hmm.
Making the organization as a whole smart so that it is learning all the time.
Right. No, thank you for that very much. We did have another question come in. About where can I find more data about the frequency of times someone needs to touch something to really learn it, and saying that's in relation to trying to determine how many activities maybe are needed with any given week. Now, I don't have that type of data at my fingertips to share. I think there are probably some studies out there, probably been around for a while, the idea of how many times something needs to be looked at or thought about before it's learned. But I'll say a couple things. First off, I know it's more than once. And it isn't so much about at that point, how many times do I touch it, but once I've got it, and especially if you're thinking within a week, how many times, it's more about, can I put it into practice? Let me try to, whatever it is that I've, knowledge I've acquired, how do I put it into practice? And whether that's literally on the job or if it's through some sort of simulation scenario, role play, whatever it is, but being able to put it into practice, giving them some sort of mechanism to apply the knowledge is what's really going to, solidify it and drive it home. And so the only other thing I will say about it is I'll go the opposite direction about, how many times does somebody need to touch something to really learn it? The piece of data that I will reference is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Ebbinghaus curve, but it's been around since the 1800s. And it basically says that after a formal learning experience, some sort of class that you sit through, um, people will forget about 90% of what was delivered in that class within 7 days or so. And this drop off is steep. It's within a day, it's already, somewhere around 50% of it is gone. So how often does somebody need to touch something to really learn it? Well, there has to be some sort of revisiting frequency to fight off that Ebbinghaus curve. The fact that if you just touch it once, you deliver it once and hope for the best, all that time, money, and energy you spent creating that amazing class or that great course, 90% of it is out the window. So, while I don't have a rule of thumb for how many or how often, it's clearly more than once. I don't think we're going to pack someone's week with daily activities, but depending on the situation, it might be a very specific outcome you're trying to achieve. It could be, listen, I need you to do this activity once a day. Each one of these different activities once a day, so that by the end of the week we know that it's really stuck. That might be the case. So, I'm sure there's research out there that you can find about, the idea of what is it? If you do something however many times, it's a habit. If you say somebody's name 3 times, you remember it. I'm sure there's data out there about how many times you need to experience some sort of learning content for it to stick. But I don't have that at my fingertips, so sorry about that. Any other questions that anybody has before we let everyone go? I don't see any more coming in. You know what, Vinod, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much to Litmus for sponsoring the webinar. I appreciate the insights you bring. I'll say my thanks to everybody, and Vinod, I'll let you have the last word.
No, yeah, thank you everybody for spending your valuable 1 hour with us. Actually, it has been pleasure, David. The pleasure has been all mine. Thank you for inviting Litmus to be a part of this webinar, and it's actually awesome to be part of the webinar and answer some of the questions that people out there. And hopefully, we have answered some nagging questions in your mind about what is this digital learning. Is it a passing fad? What it entails for my learning org to embrace the digital learning, and brought some clarity into it. Our lines are always open. You've got our contact information here. You can reach out to us, or you can reach out to me personally at VCHOUD as in David HA, Vichauda at caliduscloud.com, and I'd be able to help you answer whatever questions you might have, or reach out to Brendan Hall. And hope you had a great work week ahead of you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one. Appreciate it.